And hello, welcome to Let's Talk Bohurt, where we get into the important things of Bohurt and the things around it. Today, we're going to step away from the fighting and the technical training a bit, get more into the physical conditioning side with someone with a lot of experience on the matter. We'll be talking to Matt Griffiths here. Matt, if you just want to introduce yourself to people at home.
Yeah, sure. Hello, guys. My name's Matt Griffiths. I run G-Force Strength and Conditioning. I've been in the training world for elite athletes for over 20 years now. I've worked with some big names, such as The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, Martin Ford, Eddie Hall, Donna Moore, World's Strongest Woman. I've trained 38 world powerlifting champions it is now. I've trained multiple MMA champions. Got a second dan judo myself. And I used to be a boxer as well, so the sort of combat side of things is quite efficient. But I learned my sort of trade in the army, so there's a lot of good physical stuff I can sort of help you guys with.
Yeah, fantastic. It's good to hear you. It's obviously quite a impressive pedigree you got there, and you know your apples, I would assume. So you've got a very elite portfolio of people you've trained there for a broad range of categories. But something I've often found from running a club is a lot of our recruits that we get in are quite singularly either not athletic or haven't done combat sports before. Well, I'm sure you've had the same. Where would you recommend people to start day zero on their fitness journey, whatever you want to call it? What's the...
Yeah. I think you tend to find with the sort of nature of the sort of sports, certainly from what I've seen, you get the guys that come from, I suppose they're sort of more into the sort of fantasy and history background, and they might not have been your atypical jocks and sportsmen at school. Absolutely. So for those guys to really push through to get an understanding of these things, first of all, anyone can improve. Anyone can improve. It's just a case of applying yourself to it. Secondly, the major thing for combat sports is your recovery rate. It's all about recovery rates. You can be as big and strong as you like. Just if I came into it now, be as big and strong as I want. The moment I'm out of gas, if I'm not recovering fast enough and that gas isn't back in there, I am doing the proverbial blowing out of my arse. And that's the end of that one. That's all she wrote. So it's all about recovery rates. So where I would push these guys, if they want to do something outside, and if they want to do it either by themselves or in a club, if they're doing it by themselves, I would look at starting what we call HIIT training or HIIT training, which is high intensity interval training. This is all about bringing the heart rate up and then having a short rest to allow the heart rate to recover. That's key in any contact sport, whether you're talking Bohurt, whether you're talking wrestling or judo or MMA, rugby. If you watch how these athletes perform, it's all stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. So that's what you've got to be training for. You train for that. If you are looking to do it in a club environment, any of the sort of combat sports where you do MMA, boxing, things like that, will give you a fantastic base of fitness for it. Or just a simple circuit training club. They're all there to do. If you don't want to walk into that and start doing another combat sport as well, circuit training is a perfect place to start. Nice and simple.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say cardio is king, and you can have the best technique in the world. If it's locked behind poor fitness, you're going to lose every time.
Well, the bottom line is you can take anything, and I always like the way I like to always describe things when I'm coaching my class, put it into something relative and relevant. Now, you take a big juggernaut pulling a trailer, or you take the modern Ferrari or a Bugatti Veyron. Nice, big, powerful engines. Take the fuel away, where they're going? Absolutely nowhere.
No.
So if you haven't got the ability to do that, and the part of the thing is the human body, the oxygen is the demand to be able to make your heart recover, to be able to actually power that. So you're basically turning the engine off if you can't recover. So it's all about that.
Yeah, I often push my lads towards things like Tabata training, something like that, because it's a nice, easy sort of formula to work with.
Absolutely.
I like doing it on treadmills because I'm very lazy and I like the motivation of not being thrown off the back.
If that works. Yeah. It's good. I've seen enough fail videos where that's happened. So.
So that's for the beginners in there. And like we say, you've trained people for a lot of different end goals. And so your end goal says where you've got to start and what you've got to do. And you've seen what we do in our sport. So what do you think we've got to do differently from, say, MMA or bodybuilders, and what should we take away from them? What should we particularly be focused on for what we do?
Okay. So if we were to let's look at MMA first, because it's sort of like a popular sort of thing that's out there at the moment. The reality is when you're looking at the differences with Bohurt and MMA. You do get some strikers in MMA, but there tends to be a lot of close-knit, very technical grappling. Now, while it's not bad to be able to learn those kind of things, that's not going to happen so much in armour because you don't have the mobility. You don't have the ability to do that anyway. So you don't want to over-focus on that sort of technical aspect that they're doing down there. Mm-hmm. Now, the striking aspect is very important. So you've got to be able to do that. But the difference is there, if an MMA fighter or a boxer or anyone, for example, is throwing a punch, throwing a kick, etc., they've got a lot of freedom of mobility. They can use a lot of elastic tension to deliver that force, and it's all about that snap movement coming through. That's great. But again, you're in armour. So straight away, you've got added resistance. Straight away, you've got reduced mobility. So when you are training, train for your sport. The word fitness means fit for purpose. Okay? A sumo wrestler isn't going to be a jockey. You know, a jockey isn't going to be a rugby prop forward. A rugby prop forward's not going to be an F1 driver. It's being fit for your purpose. So you need to find some way of creating resistance. So you're fighting against resistance, particularly bands are quite good for this kind of thing. And practice, get hold of your armour and practicing the stuff. Because there's nothing beats actually training in what you've got to use in that sort of full dress rehearsal. Because you will find you'll get more tired in that sort of stuff. You'll find this doesn't move, you out running, do all the burpees, do all the squat thrusts you want. All of a sudden, if your mobility's down or something, pressure on your lungs in a different place, it's going to change things. You've got to make it specific to what you're doing.
So I think there's an important caveat to that with putting your armour on and training. That is sometimes you see people taking a bit too far and performing like lifts or anything like that with their armour on. And they don't understand why people say it's a bad idea because they think it's add resistance or I'll get used to being in armour. But it's not adding like a viable resistance, and all it's doing is lowering your ability to perform a technical lift or something correctly.
Yeah, in terms of that, my first worry would be the safety element of it. If you were looking at, let's look at some common lifts. Let's look at, say, a deadlift. You're going to be, for a start, the bar's going to be in a different position. It's going to be pushed further forward, whether you've got armour on or not. You're not going to deadlift in a Bohurt fight. For a start, it's not going to happen. So what carryover is that actually having? Yes, you want to get stronger, but you're better off getting stronger, focusing on the strength aspect of an actual deadlift.
Yes.
And then putting that into practice, training the movements in the armour. If you're trying to get stronger in the deadlift in the armour, A, it's not going to happen. B, it's going to put the bar path in a different position. It's going to send all that force straight to your lumbar spine, exactly where you don't want it, because you want it all in your hips. And once you start doing that, it's an injury waiting to happen.
Yes, absolutely. So there's videos going about people doing all sorts of exercises in armour. And I think you've just got to make sure whatever you're doing is completely relevant. Because as you say, just armour's there to protect you. Don't use it to get yourself hurt.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So talking about mistakes, like you've trained a few people in Bohurt now, and what are like the biggest mistakes people make or have got in their heads when they start getting into training or preparing for competition?
Okay. The two sort of major ones that come out of it, and this happens, this one isn't just relevant to Bohurt, this is relevant to a lot of combat sports, is people try and be bodybuilders. Now, bodybuilding is a beauty contest. It's about appearance. It's about looking a certain way. It has naff all to do with function. Yes, these guys lift a lot of weight. They do a lot of repetitions and all that. I'm not in any way discrediting the work they do in the gym or what they do in their sport. However, it's a subjective sport. It's like artistic gymnastics or something like that. Now, people like to look good. That's fine, but pick your lane. You know, if you want to do Bohurt, if that's what you're going to do, train as a fighter. Train to be a fighter. Don't train to be a bodybuilder. Yeah. They're restrictive. You know, I predominantly train in terms of strength athletics, and I already know just from my own combat background, etc. I wouldn't, you know, even without the armor, going back into judo or something like that, I'd struggle because my mobility is down. I'm mobile enough for my sport because that's my focus. But if you try to transverse to something else, it's going to be there. So number one is don't be a bodybuilder, train to be a fighter. Which brings me on to number two. people focus all the time on this 1 rep max nonsense. Now, this is across the world again. I'm going to say this straight away. You're not a powerlifter. You're not a strongman. Who cares what your 1 rep max is? Nobody cares. You can go, oh, I can deadlift 4 plates, 400 pounds, 180 kilos, whatever people want to do. Well, that's great. Who weighs that amount that you're fighting? So who cares? You'd be better off being able to lift sort of a lower weight. Say we were talking to a guy about the 180. You'd be better off being able to lift 140. So we're talking above the weight of a sort of 100 kilo guy plus his armor, plus a bit more to be sure. If you can lift that 140 repetitively, explosively for multiple sets and deliver that force, bang, 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 bang. When you're tired, then you've always got that force there ready to go, rather than hitting that top end stuff, that grinder where you start going slow. Try and throw somebody slowly. It doesn't work. You've got to be explosive. You've got to move fast. So make it relevant to your sport. Strength is relevant to your sport, not somebody else's. You're not a strongman. You're not a powerlifter. You're not a bodybuilder. Don't try and be one.
Yeah, it's a mistake I used to make a long time ago. Is just like say fitness isn't one big monolithic thing.
That's right.
You're either not. It's not like you're fit or you're not. So I used to just. This when I was young, I'd pick up some sort of workout plan from I don't know, Men's Health or something. You'd go and do 3 sets of 10 reps of whatever dumbbell was there. And I think it links back into how we said you've got a lot of different clients with a lot of different plans. You've got to program for what you want.
Absolutely.
Flick-flacking between what's popular or what working for other people when they do other stuff. And as you say, 1 rep maxes is it's good. Being strong only ever helps, but I never tend to work out my 1 rep maxes because I don't need to. And
absolutely
adds a load onto my nervous system that I don't really need to know.
That is 100% correct. You perfectly hit it there. Now, the reality is with the 1 rep max is it's very fatiguing. It is nervous system dominant.
It doesn't
make you any stronger. All it does is tell you how strong you are. If you are work to something that is sub-maximal. If you have to do it in a program, I'd rather work to a sort of 90% for a double than I would for even as a competitor that uses 1 rep maxes once or twice a year. That's all I'm doing. That's the only time I'll ever do a true 1 rep max. So if I'm only doing it once or twice a year and that's my sport, what the hell are you guys doing it for every bleeding month?
Yeah,
that should put it into some sort of perspective for you. Whereas if you can, if I sort of touch on some of the training I did with some of the guys that were sort of fighting in this, based on their ability level, it's tailored to each individual depending on where they were. One was male, one was female. The female wanted to develop her upper body strength, so we made it relevant to the sport. So, start building her up through the sort of press-ups on the knees to the actual press-ups, to partial press-ups, etc. Now, the chap was a lot fitter. He's working, so we have him doing plyometric push-ups, handstand push-ups, walking up the wall so he can do it, so he's actually got to walk his feet back up the wall before he does the push-ups, etc. Mobility in the shoulders and strength, because that's what fighting is. So make the strength relevant to the sport again. It's always, and I'll tell you now, you'll see a theme about that. It's always going to come back to that, making it relevant.
Relevancy is a big thing. So we've gone from that to a big thing about the Bohurt community is it's a completely amateur sport. And you're obviously heavily entrenched in a professional arena with a lot of professional input, whereas we're in the wild west of our sport at the moment. There's a lot of people with a lot of ideas of what's good and what's not. And I'm sure you've seen some of them already.
Yeah.
As you've looked from the outside in there, have you seen anything that has surprised you about being particularly useful about the way we do things? And on the other hand, have you seen anything where you've been like, what are these people doing? Why are they doing that to themselves?
I think when it comes to that, again, it's gonna come back to that relevancy from what I've seen of stuff. If we just sort of talk in the strength and conditioning side of things, it's that ability to recover and move fast is the real relevance we want. Whether you're doing it in the one-on-ones, whether you're doing it in the team events, etc. When there, obviously some absolutely crazy things in your communities where there's 20 on 20 and all that, and you just go, wow. And you start thinking, you start putting into context going, and I immediately start thinking of things like rugby. Start thinking, well, you've got a lot of people, a lot of physical contact going on in a lot of different places. Now, the real thing there, as a rugby player, that was always tough to do, which I think is very relevant, and I had some of the guys doing, is being put on your arse and getting back up again. Now, that's hard to do in armour, I should imagine.
Yeah.
Because it's hard to do without armour.
Gets really old.
But
really
it constantly happens. If you've been hit, you've been thrown, the wind's been knocked out of you, make sure that you've got that recovery rate to be able to continuously get back up again, because you can't fight if you're not on your feet. So that's one big thing I would sort of put in there. And I suppose a slight element of that would be perhaps having a look at some of the judo techniques for break forms, etc., so you don't get as winded when these things are happening. I imagine it's going to be a lot more difficult because of the mobility aspect, but as much as you sort of can. And some of the stuff, again, I mean, I did see, we've already touched on it when people are lifting in the armour and stuff like that. But when people are going over the top with things, when it comes to flexibility, explosive force, fitness work, as a general rule of thumb, you only want to be 5 or 10% more flexible than any movement you're going to be performing, realistically. Now, the argument always is with combat sports, you can get tied up and twisted and put into some positions that you don't want to be in. The thing is, you can't fight and count for every variable. An element of that then comes into the sort of skill side of training, which we're not really touching on. I'm sure you'll cover that in different areas, to basically not be in that area and try and get out of it as best as you can. But when you are working these things, don't go over the top. Don't think you've got to be able to do the splits. Don't think you've got to be able to do the splits in your armour. Don't think you've got to, there was one video which I saw, and a chap was doing box jumps in his armour. And I was watching it going, that is just an accident waiting to happen. It really is. Now, vertical jumps are fantastic. There's a brilliant movement, explosive force, etc. Fantastic. A lot of, pretty much every track and field athlete does them. But you don't try and do them with like a ball on your foot. You don't try and do them in sort of, setting yourself on fire while you're doing it. You don't try and do these things because it just becomes stupid. It's just an unnecessary risk. And you have to basically weigh up the risk versus the reward of any exercise. Maybe you're doing it for likes on a video. Maybe you'll get that. That's great. Maybe it's a bit of fun. Okay, I'm not going to stop people doing that, but just be a bit more sensible with things.
Protect your shins from the box, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah, you'd have that, but you could cheap pair of shin guards will do that.
And that brings me on to something that I see a lot of as well, and I think it's a problematic mindset with a lot of training that I suppose it's got a noble heart to it, but thinking something's good training just because it's hard. Good training should be hard, but not all hard things are good. Like you've said, you've got experience in the army. I'm sure you've perfectly seen how people take a perfectly good workout, just made it too hard to be of any benefit in a way that doesn't work.
Yeah, I mean, there's the reality with this, and when we sort of delve into some of the personal, like physical training aspects, there's a thing that we call your MRV, which is your maximum recovery volume, and your MAV, which is your maximum adaptive volume. Now, you can push yourself, and I'm all up for people pushing themselves, but if you continuously push yourself past your MRV, your body will actually start to fight back against you and de-adapt because you've been overstressed. So the whole job of any kind of training is to stimulate, not annihilate. You annihilate yourself. Everyone's got this whole thing of training sane or remain the same. And it's something I absolutely hate, because training insane is like doing squats on a unicycle while on fire while you're trying to run away from a bear. That's insane. Well, what benefits is that going to give you? Whereas if you actually try, I prefer this sort of train smart and perfect your art. That's the way to do these things. Yeah,
sure. I think what kind of typifies this for me is like the evolution of how a burpee has changed in the years with CrossFit. It used to just be hands down, feet out, bit of core stability, back up, and now you've got to do a press up and a star jump, and you're still doing the same number of them for a workout as you was 5 years ago. So now people aren't doing a burpee; they're flopping on the floor and lazily standing up. There's worse technique than doing the original exercise, but they've just made harder for the sake of it.
It got to a stage, and then there's a few things that have done this. I don't remember a show that used to be on called Superstars, and it used to take athletes from different disciplines, and they'd have a variety of tests to see who was the, I suppose, the fittest or the superstar of them, or was it superhuman, something like that. And I remember watching Austin Healy, rugby player, and he was doing squat thrusts, and they basically had a pretty slippery mat, and he took his trainers off and he had his socks on, and he was just sliding his feet back and forth on the mat rather than actually jumping back and forth, and their toes were covered in blood at the end of it. And they've done however many, 70, 80 in 30 seconds or whatever it was. But I'm sat there going, you haven't done a single squat thrust there. You haven't done a single one.
Yeah.
You know, it's like when people do push-ups and you see the Guinness World Record of push-up and this little pump motion, and I'm like, well, that's not a push-up.
Or
and it's like you said there, and then the sort of evolution of CrossFit turned into that when it became a case of you've got to do this many reps. It stopped being you've got to do this many strict reps to you've just got to get up there somehow within this period of time. And all these pike pull-ups and all these crazy variations came in. And while, there's an element of control and athleticism to them, for the average Joe, it's just pointless.
It's not worth it, is it?
Stick to the basics. The human body has not evolved that much in a couple of generations. No. The basics still work. The basics are still the best.
Yeah, good. So we went through like common sort of misconceptions and that, but what do you think are like the most problematic stumbling blocks people have when they once they get into their training? What do you think is the most problematic misconceptions or mental blocks people get into, and how do we avoid those?
Mental blocks are a very, very big one. It's something I focus on a lot with my coaching, and I call it one of the pillars I use within it. It's called psychological supremacy, and I wrote an article called Mindset Mastery about this. Now, you've got to have what we call a growth mindset, which is where you're actually open to options and suggestions. Because what happens when we start training is, now, it's kind of like the gears of a car, okay? There's a lot of different systems out there, and there's a lot of different systems that have benefits. And you'll be doing them, and you'll see some benefit from, say you're doing a particular training method. I'll just use 5x5 for an example. You're using that, you see some benefits. Great. You go off, you do something else, You've now been training a year, 2 years, and you go, I saw benefits from 5x5. I'll do that again because that works. It's kind of like being on the motorway and sort of going, well, I used first gear to pull away from the lights and accelerate up on that. I'm on the motorway now. I'll go back down into first gear. It's not the right gear for you then. You know, you're at a different position because you've got fitter and stronger, etc., and things have changed. And this comes down to what we call periodization. Everything works, but everything doesn't work forever.
No.
And you have to be able to know when to change your training, when to push things. You can, for example, if you're training to increase your VO2 max, which is basically the volume of oxygen, within your blood that you can carry at any one time, which aids recovery. Now, sort of a baseline of doing that is a good sort of 20 or 30 minute hard slog, being out of breath, that kind of thing is where you can sort of really push that. But you can't just continuously push that, because if you were to do that and it was what we call linear progression, where it just carried on, everyone would be the Flash in the end, because they'd just be able to go further and further and further and further and further. And we know that doesn't happen. There's a limit to where the human body can go. So you have to learn to wave things up and then step it back and wave up slightly more. And to do that, sometimes you have to step back down again to wave back up, cycle it up, and focus on your competitions, because you want to be hitting the peak crest of that wave when you compete, because that is the only time it matters.
Yes. Yeah, that's it is the only thing that matters, is what happens in the arena there. So we getting onto mindset there as well. I've noticed that's something that you seem to focus on massively when I've looked at what you've done, who you've trained with. So, and you mentioned you've got some pillars there. So what is your system of building up someone's mind for physical fitness, competition, all of that? What are we looking for inside?
What I tend to do with guys is I try and explain things to them as to why they're doing things. This is the what, but why are you doing it? If I'm saying to somebody, you're going to do shuttle sprints, you're going to do a 10-meter shuttle sprint, then you're going to drop to your belly, and then you're going to get back up again and shuttle back. Why? And I start going, well, you're training your heart rate to recover, you're training to be thrown down at the same time. So you're doing a couple of things within one movement, which is more efficient for your body. So you're not doing 2 separate drills. So you recover faster and then can do more. They go, oh, okay, that makes sense. And so they understand it. And then when they trust in a process, people will follow that process. And a good example of this is branding. Okay. People trust brands.
Yeah.
You know, I was to say to you, you know, if this was going out globally and I'm to say across the world, you want to get an expensive dress watch, what brand are you going to get? Never go Rolex.
Yeah.
You know Rolex, don't you?
Yeah.
When you go to a cheap fast food restaurant, where are you going to go? Golden Arches. There we are, McDonald's. We know that. We trust the brand. And that's the same with training principles. You've got to trust the method you're using. And then when you've put that trust in there and you understand what it's doing and why it's doing it, it becomes more relevant to you and you'll accept it more. Now, this comes down to sort of cognitive conditioning. If, you know, as a grown adult, you're not going to stand there, turn the hob on your cooker and put your hand in the fire because you know that's going to hurt. It's going to injure you. Fire's going to injure you. You didn't know that as a child. You've learned that. And so now you've naturally, well, I'm not doing that. But that's the same process. We know different to we were when we were children. We just learn different things to cognitively process ourselves. And it's identifying within ourselves when stress happens, when bad things happen, to go, I'm actually thinking and I'm shutting things down and I'm not thinking clearly. This is where stress hormones come in. Cortisol's a good one. Now, you guys are into sort of Bohurt, so, you know, we're sort of going back into that medieval world. So let's step back even further. We take even the medieval history where we're living in the wild. So you're out, hunter-gatherer, as, I don't know, a bear. What will happen is you'll get a massive release of cortisol and adrenaline. Now, what this is going to do is it's going to shut down your thought process. You're not going to want to mate. You're not going to want to eat. You're not going to want to do any of those things. You are going to want to do one of 2 things. Kill the bear or get away from the bear. Fight or flight. We all know that. We've all heard that phrase before. During that period of time, you think you're thinking clearly. That's a stress mindset. And one of the key things you have to do is to identify, use notes, use things that write down things in your training journal. When you go, I know that works. I know why I'm doing it. But you're looking, I don't want to do that. Something's stopping me doing that. Look at the logic behind it, not the emotion. Don't make the decisions with your emotion, make them with the logic. Follow the science. I know that works. There's evidence to say that works. So we follow that. The moment you start letting your emotion get into it, I wasn't very good at that last time. It hurts. Don't want to do it again. What do you do instead? You go off and go, oh, I feel bad about myself now. Now I need to release some serotonin in my brain and get some dopamine in there. Let's go have a cake instead. And that's what happens. Whereas if you actually did it, you get the same serotonin and dopamine release anyway, and that's the exercise high. So follow the principles that work. I mean, I could talk about mindset for hours and hours and hours, the way the brain works. But you've basically got 3 big chemicals in there. You've got serotonin, dopamine, and norepinephrine. And these things have to be in balance. If you get one too much in one place, well, you know, norepinephrine, for example, is a focus and clarity of thought. That's the kind of thing that gets stimulated with illegal substances, for example. It forces norepinephrine into the brain and it leaves it stuck there the whole time. So you think you're thinking clearly, you think you're thinking straight. And that's what that does. Dopamine is the pleasure and reward hormone. So those kind of things. I'm having sugar, I'm having that spike. It's great, I feel good. Then you get the crash afterwards because it's out of balance. The 3 big hitters need to stay all in balance. And that's where nutrition comes into it as well, because they help. That helps with it. But then it's understanding that as well. But having the mindset to go, the nutrition is the fuel, the exercise, we follow the science. That delivers the best outcome. You get the best outcome from your training. All of a sudden, you feel better about your training. You're more likely to apply yourself to it again. And that's how it sort of works.
Yeah. So the following of a routine and having something in there is really important. There's nothing, I think, more devastating to a fitness transition or anything than going into a gym without a plan. If you've ever done, you just kind of walk in there and go, I'll lift that up a bit, and shall I do some sprints? No, sprints suck. I'll go do a deadlift. I'm good at deadlifts. And then you get into some real bias training. You only train what you're good at.
Absolutely.
So you're only good at one thing. And that's why training partners help, having a coach helps, and just having that plan is the most important thing I find, because even if it's just a bit of paper that you've written down, your past and future self can just guilt you into doing whatever you don't want to do.
I'll tell you what, I'll give you a good bit of advice for anybody that's listening to this now. Within your clubs, within your teams, within that, you all probably have chat threads on Facebook or WhatsApp or whatever media you're using. Create a training one for everyone. And be accountable to each other. They're your teammates. Be accountable. Because the moment you become accountable, and I don't mean by going, oh, yeah, I've done that. Well, film it for me that I want to see. The moment you know somebody's watching and going to see that, you'll do it. You'll put more effort into it. That accountability does help. And then you start learning to be accountable to yourself. And when you've learned to be accountable to yourself, you'll never quit.
As I've always said, it's a big thing I'll do when I get people training is I get them to watch each other and pick each other up, because teaching is a good way of learning.
Absolutely.
And a big point I try to get across to them, you're doing your mate no favors by letting them do something shit. If you want to do your mate a favor, tell them they're doing something badly. And to get that to become a friendly thing, rather than people think, oh, he keeps telling me I'm doing it wrong. Oh, what an idiot. I'm being your mate by telling you you're doing this wrong. Now you're doing it better. You're a better human being for doing it. So it's
absolutely
getting over the idea that criticism is bad, and to be a good friend, you have to criticize your mates into the dirt.
And the thing is that you can turn it into that sort of fun training environment as well, where it is sort of banter but relevant, and it's constructive in that sense. And I've had it before where I've been into a gym, and I lift some decent weights and stuff, powerlifting champion. So compared to the average gym guy, it's quite considerable. And then you'll get people in there that haven't seen that environment, and they just instantly hero worship you. Oh, that's amazing and all that. But then I'd have pals going, that was shit, that was. You did that wrong. Your elbow kicked out there. It's rubbish. You're going to do it properly then or what? Okay. Now, I prefer that than the hero worship. The hero worship doesn't improve. It's not going to make me any better. Whereas, as you've absolutely struck on there, that constructive criticism, and if you can do it in that fun, banterous way, these are the guys you're going to be training with. These are the guys you're going to war with. These are the guys you're bleeding with. So you've got to have each other's back. You've got to have each other's trust. Trust that if something's going to happen, say you're in a team event, you need to be talking to each other. That if somebody's saying something, that you trust them, going, yeah, I need to be turning this way, or I need to be moving my body over here to support in this angle. And you can build this in all areas. That's why being accountable to each other and having this constructive feedback is so important, and not taking it personally, taking it for what it is.
Leave the ego outside and.
Absolutely. We don't fail. We either do it right, or we learn.
Yeah.
And we call it failing forward. Yeah. That's all it is. It's like there is no I can't. It's I can't yet. That's the way I look at it.
So something else to try to get across to people as well, to when you start failing at stuff, like when you first start training, you just exponentially grow really good, but then you get into a grind and you start to fail at stuff, starts to get hard. And that is when inevitably you start hearing the excuses of outside agencies, or it's too hard to do that. And a very unpopular thing that I have to say to people a lot is, it's your fault. And being able to take that on board, and instead of being a criticism, realizing it's giving you the agency to change what's wrong. It's not that you can't lift the weight because it's too heavy. You can't lift it because you're too weak, but you can change that. Yeah. And you have the agency in that situation. You have the power. It's your fault, and that's a good thing.
Absolutely, because you've just struck on there a real key element. Because the moment you can identify what the issue is, you can do something about it. Yeah. If your car engine's not working, and you just say, I don't know, what's wrong with it? I don't know.
Just kick the tires.
The spark plugs need changing, or the battery's flat, or the crankshaft's stuck, or whatever. You know what it is. You go, right. We replace that part, we fix that part, we make that part better, which is what we're doing in the gym with our training, with our technique, with our mindset, whatever it is. And then we work again, it works better. Yeah. And then we know if that kind of thing's happening again, we know what we're looking for. So that's really, really key.
When the car is your body, it's about taking on some uncomfortable truths and being able to deal with it from there. That's where the real growth mindset comes from.
Absolutely.
To rob your own terms out of your mouth there.
No, by all means, sure. So, I'm sure I probably stole them from somewhere.
Best ideas are always stolen, aren't they?
Absolutely. I invented plagiarism.
You earlier when you introduced yourself as a strength and conditioning coach. Now, strength is very easy to pinpoint, picking up big things, but conditioning as a word has become a bit of a bugbear to me recently because it gets used for everything to the point where it doesn't really mean anything anymore. Like you see people doing burpees onto a box whilst shouting, I'm doing conditioning. They're hitting a tire with a hammer. I'm conditioning. They're running milk bottles up and down their shins. I'm conditioning. To you, at least, what does it mean, and how should we tackle that? Because it's apparently really important because it's all anyone's doing, but no one knows what it means.
Conditioning is just another word for fitness. It's all it is, really. The fitness industry is absolutely rife with different phrases, different clever slogans, different clever slang, different things to print on T-shirts and mugs and to tell everybody who doesn't know that you're training and that makes you better than them. You know, it's like Globo Gym because we're better than you. It's like that's what it's like. Now, stop doing that. Turn your focus internally. Deal with your own shit. Deal with yourself. Focus on improving yourself and improving, your conditioning is effectively what you need to do for your sport. Now, that might include prehab work, which for those that are unfamiliar is where there's certain injuries that come about quite often. So you do perhaps some muscle tissue release, some fascia release to help prevent that happening. There's rehab work, which is after sort of injuries and those things have happened. We always say prevention is better than the cure, but sometimes you don't know it's going to happen. And then there's obviously the actual ability to be fit for your sport. You know, that all sort of comes under the conditioning banner there. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that people do. The reality is that there's a lot of people in gymnasiums and things like that that say they're doing this, but you're only really conditioning if you're doing something for sport. I'm conditioning, I'm in great condition. You're like, for what? For what? You know, that guy that's in the pub, he's in great condition for drinking lager and eating pig snacks all night. So is that his conditioning? Because you can use, it's exactly what you've said. That's his conditioning. That's what he does. He's what is he, Eric? The darts player. That's what he does. I should have taken up darts. It sounds like so much more fun.
That's all I've got from this so far.
What am I doing with my life? But yeah, so it's about making everything comes back to your sport. I would always say, if you're passionate about something, pick your road. If you want to be a Bohurt fighter, then make your focus inch wide but mile deep. Focus on everything about that. Because the moment you start letting all these different shiny things dropped off from all these magpies from elsewhere, you become a jack of all trades and a master of none. And that's not what you want. You want to be the best at what you do. It's irrelevant what Conor McGregor's doing or Tyson Fury's doing or Ronaldo's doing on the foot. Nobody cares. They're not Bohurt fighters. So, what does it matter? Focus on what you've got to do. That's where conditioning comes in. And as we've said, the strength aspect as well, that's going to vary. Being strong for your sport.
Yeah. Oh, good. So that's everything I had to ask you as such. But is there anything you think that people need to know about how to get into shape for Bohurt, essentially? Any of your bugbears that you'd like to get on the soapbox and air out?
Yeah, there's a lot of there's many of those. I can be a rock grumpy bastard at times. One of the things I always use in my coaching environment, which has always made me popular, is I always use the hashtag no more bullshit. I mean, I hate hashtags as well. I hate them. I hate all these things. And I'll even in my, I write in my documents the same way I talk. I'll be like, here we go, another mnemonic coming out, another one. But this is what it really means. We just come back to keeping it simple. You don't need to have all these glorification things. If anyone's approaching you, and I'll speak from my experience now because I am a coach, and I'll come to you straight now. So if any of these coaches are approaching you, making something sound too good to be true, it's because it is. If they're coming to you trying to baffle you, it's because it's bullshit. And I always go back to Einstein with this one. He says, if you can't explain a topic simply enough, you do not know it well enough.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line. You make it simple for what you've got to do. If you've got to be whacking somebody around the head with a sword or an axe or a hammer or whatever, whatever, train to do that. That's what you've got to train to do. It doesn't matter what kind of a shot you are with an assault rifle or something, if that's what you're doing. If someone's going, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Why? Always ask that question, why?
Yeah.
Find out the most relevant answers. And if someone can give you a simple answer as to why, and you can ask that question, say 4 or 5 times, because that's when you get down to the nitty gritty. They give you an answer, but why? Give you an answer, but why? And if they get stuck 2 or 3 times, they don't know what they're talking about. If you can keep digging and keep digging and keep digging, you'll really find out the reasons why. Or they'll give you an answer first off that goes, this is exactly why, this is the research that backs it up. That's what happens. This is what the best are doing. So if the best are doing it, very often you've got to start looking at, well, how did they get there? Let's imitate that. Don't do what other people do and they go, that's what they're doing now. Let's imitate that. Do what they did to get the skills to get there in the first place, the conditioning to get there in the first place. You don't start, again, using the car example, you don't pull away in 5th gear.
No.
Doing 80 miles an hour or 70 if you're legal. You have to pull away. You go through the gears. It's the same with everything. Go through the gears, go through the sequence, go through the tried and tested routes. Sometimes you'll get the odd thing come out. I'm not going to turn around and say something might not come out that makes somebody a complete maverick and someone goes, wow, we didn't think of that. But those things are there, but they're not there as much as the internet makes out. They're really not. We've tried most things these days. We usually have to go at something. So keep it simple. That is the one that sort of
keep it simple.
It's a good one. It's another mnemonic that's out there, but that's probably the most relevant one.
That is important because quite often, like when we're trying to figure out how to beat people, we look at the best people doing it and go, what are they doing? That's what we should do. That's a really important point, that we need to look at the road that has led up to the point they're at. And but so often people will look at what they're doing and go, but why don't we reinvent the wheel? We could do it, or we could not. Because there's a lot of effort to reinvent that wheel, and they've got a pretty good wheel over there. I'd rather just
that's going to say
that wheel.
Perfectly good at what it does. That is, let's not broke what's let's not fix what isn't broken. Sorry.
But so just to reiterate a couple of points that have come up previously as they escaped out of my brain. You're speaking about like thinking in the stress state, and I think that's quite an important aspect for our sport, especially there's 24 people in the pit, axes swinging around. And I've always said to people, if you've got time to think in a fight, you've probably already lost.
Yeah.
So it's important to be able to condition your mind as much as anything else to be able to work quickly and clearly in that stressed time.
Absolutely. I think the best, I'm going to go to a sport that I know relatively well with boxing. We used to spend hours, you'd look at, I suppose it's like looking at the most common variables that are there. There's always going to be some crazy variable that you can't always count for. That's outside of your control.
Yeah.
So if it's outside of your control, there's no point worrying about it. You control what you can control. Now, if you have common variables, for example, you are against a team, they always use a certain formation, they always attack in this certain, but they use these certain types of attacks. Then condition your body to react to the initial movement, perhaps a shoulder moves, perhaps something, and then that attack, so your body reacts to it before it's happened, almost, and it becomes that sort of preemptive strike. It either removes you from the situation, or it blocks, or somehow, or gives a preemptive attack because they've left a gap open, for example. Now that's when it starts getting quite technical. But that's when you really know you're drilled in. That's how fighters across the board train. If this is happening, this is what you do. And they will practice that drill over and over and over and over again. And what was that quote? Now, one's just popped in my head that's sort of relevant to this. And it was, do not fear the man that practices 1,000 techniques. Fear the man that practices one technique 1,000 times.
Yeah.
Or 10,000 it might be, but whatever. You get the idea.
Yeah.
You get the idea. Like so it's all about repetition and teaching the body to have that motor skill to do that.
Yeah.
That reaction speed. You knock a glass off your counter, you're going to go for it with your hand because you're used to just little things like catching drills and stuff. That is sort of part of, I suppose, conditioning, if you will, because it's that reaction speed. But that is, as you've said, it's conditioning your head to sort of not have to focus. You're quite right. If you are having to think about, I'm going to do this, it's too late by then because you've just been whacked in the face.
Yeah. It's, for me, you need to get your body into a position where you can go into the list and let your body just run on muscle memory because the whole time, like your brain's just going to be going what, and your reptile brain inside there's just going to be going ah. So you need to allow for that and just let your body do the work. And that's one of the things I like about it, is just go in there,
absolutely,
turn the brain off. And
I mean, it's quite relevant when it comes into this. What we haven't sort of touched on, I suppose, what does come under an element of strength conditioning is when I was fighting, for example, we always used to be absolutely drilled to the point of exhaustion. Okay, so cardiovascular exhaustion, so it's stuff you can recover from relatively quickly. But you're at that point where you're exhausted, so you're not got the sort of oxygen capacity going to the brain. Your thought process isn't great, and then it would be a case of, right, get in the ring. Now it's time to fight.
Yeah.
And you're fighting when you're in that state, because you've got to react or you're going to get hurt. You get, putting your hand in that fire. Once you've been hurt once and you start going, oh, I don't like that, you're going to figure out a better way of doing it. Now, you might, and I'll reach out to some of the newer guys, because I've seen it happen in all sorts of sports. People like the idea of being involved in a combat sport.
Yeah.
Until the combat starts and the contact starts and they start going, that actually hurts. And it can. It will. It happened. I've seen it before with guys that used to come to the rugby club, and it was all super trainer. Then the actual game happens, and he gets a bit tasty, and all of a sudden they were injured, and they got a hamstring pull that was perfectly fine when they're out dancing on the night time. That's what happens. So get in your safe environments as clubs build these people up, because you're helping them with their cognitive process, their conditioning. Build their process up so that their reaction changes. They start going, well, hang on, I'm not carved out of putty. I am a bit tougher than this. I can take, okay, I can feel it, but when that adrenaline's going, it's not that bad. It's not too bad. And bring them up that way. And as you said earlier, you learn a lot by helping people and giving that sort of support to each other. You'll big yourself up more. Lead, follow, or get the fuck out of the way. That's the way we used to say it in the army.
So you've touched on something that's really important to me there, is bringing people up. And as you say, a lot of people go, oh, this is a bit tasty to me, I don't like it, I'm not going to do it anymore. And for me, if I have anyone say that, that's my failure, because you should be able to bring someone up. You shouldn't be putting him to a situation that's too tasty for him too quickly. Because
agreed,
anyone can get a new person in and going to go, I'm going to fucking hurt you now. And you can. And you've hurt them and they go away. No one's achieved anything. You haven't learned anything. You've lost your one bloke subs a week from your club, and nobody's got anything. And everyone looks at you and goes, "Oh, you're really cool."
Yeah, so that's it. Yeah, you get that
building people up in the right way.
Absolutely.
Sport, you want more people doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been a fan of bullies in any sort of environment. No. It's not sort of thing that's there. But I remember when I first went to BMC, Birmingham Medieval Combat, and I ran there, and it was basically one of their lads there was used to like throwing people around, and it was a case of, Matt, go and dump him, will you? Because he needs to learn a bit of a lesson. All right, that's the way it was. Didn't do it nastily, but it's a case of, guess what? You put him in a position where, if I wanted to, you'd be poleaxed into the floor now, and this would really, really hurt you. So let's just back that off with other people. There's nothing, you don't have to be Tommy 10 men and go out there trying to annihilate your teammates. And as you quite rightly touched on, it comes into the same with PT. I've seen it to sort of put it into that. If nobody's done Bohurt, to sort of put it into an element they may have done with the sort of PT world. If you're going to a gym the first time and you've got some mate and he's giving it the big loud mouth and he, does some crazy leg session or something, he runs you ragged and then you can't walk for 2 weeks. Do you want to go back to the gym?
No, and you can't.
No, do you? Yeah. No. So, and I've seen PTs do this, and they're going, I'm going to ruin this guy. And I'm just like, well, carry on, because you're not going to have clients. I'm going to
show him just how harsh I can be.
That doesn't sound like a very clever business model to me. But, whereas if you, as you quite rightly said, if you push them through, and again, I'm going back to the same thing, car gears, stage by stage by stage by stage. And it comes down to this one thing in the fitness world we call PO, which is called simply progressive overload. It doesn't mean all the overload at once. I didn't go out into the gym world lifting what I did from day dot. Okay, everything got built up over time. Conor McGregor didn't just start off doing that. People didn't just start off this great. The Bohurt champions, they're not just going to start off going, oh, I've just put this on. I'm just well hard. I'm going to go out there and do this. That's not how it
just
works.
Gifted.
Yeah, some people are naturally better at other sports, so that's where these world champions tend to come from. But don't ever, ever underestimate hard work.
No.
Don't ever underestimate hard work. Hard work will always beat talent unless talent works hard.
Yeah. Another thing was periodization. So another thing that's important is to stop a mental overload, I think, especially when people are new to fitness. It's like, oh, so what do I need to be good at this? You need good endurance, you need good recovery, you need good deep cardio, you need good strength, you need good dynamic strength. And so I've got to train all of these. So that's like, I can't do all that in 1 week. You're like, no, we're not going to. So you need to, you need to, like, sometimes I look at everything I've got to do. I've got to improve my technique. I've got to get a bit better on my VO2 max, but I've also got to do a lot of long distance running. It's like, I've only got so many sessions a week. So you need to clump it together into your different, you're never going to be perfect at all of them.
Absolutely.
But you need to, as you peak enough at that, then you stop off into this, and then you'll do a bit of C eventually. But again, you just got to keep all the plates spinning and progressively build them all up, rather than just trying to do them all at once.
Simple way to think about it that I try to sort of put across to my guys is, if you've got these 10 things, let's just say you 10 as a nice number, you've got to improve on. So first of all, you don't want to, you can either pick 2 or 3 that are very, very similar in style that you can work on. So you can clump them together so that they all, as one progresses, the other naturally progresses. That's brilliant. That's the same thing you would do if you were doing something in the house. If you do, that's just common sense, isn't it? That's how things work. You clean up, you've picked all the rubbish up, and then you'll take the bin out because it's full. It's all just done in one sort of job. If these things aren't together and they're not balancing, then just pick a couple of them, and then everything else you just run at maintenance. So you don't let it go backwards necessarily, but you just do the minimal amount required to keep it where it is while something else progresses. And then you do that's progressed then to level 2, for example. Then you keep that at level 2, or you bring that up to level 2, and then that rises, and then that rises. And like you're saying, you're not trying to push them all up at once. It's step by step by step by step by step, making sure your body has got enough time to recover, making sure your head's got a different focus. As you mentioned earlier, you'll tend to do and apply yourself more to what you enjoy. So that will probably become lower down the priority list for me. Work at what you don't enjoy until working on what you don't enjoy becomes a habit. And then you'll generally become a better athlete from it.
And you'll enjoy it more.
Yep. Well, everyone likes that. I mean, if you can't do something, the reality is if you're out there and you're particularly good at a certain type of fitness, great, yeah, you go there, you show off and you do that, but you suck at another type of fitness, you're going to hate it. But if you get better at something you suck at, you'll feel more sense of accomplishment than you will getting better at something you're already good at.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I think that's everything I had for you there, mate. Unless you got anything else. Yeah, some real good points you put out there, and a lot of good clarity on some sticking points, I guess it was. But underneath, we'll have your Instagram and your other social media put down there. We'll get some
sure.
But as for the rest of you at home, I hope you've enjoyed it. This week's a bit different from what we've been through so far. Like us, subscribe to us. We'll be back next week. Thank you very much, and thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.